Who am I?
Richard Casimir, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Casimir in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Casimir.
Oh, he's jumped on the phone from overseas and given us a buzz. Hello, Richard.
How you doing, my brother?
Oh, not bad.
Well, in reference to Joel's call, he made a lot of good points about what is presented on the media and how it pertains to public opinion. And you made some valid points and some very correct points, too. I mean, you and I are both in the media, and having been in the media for a long time, I can honestly say it has turned around in the past 20 years to be not a source of information, but a business. What is presented on the air, unfortunately, even during the news hour, is what sells. Your listeners need to do the research. You just can't rely anymore on what's on the news that we have relied on all our lives.
Why do you think people ever relied on anything?
Because that's the only thing that's available. You have either print or television or radio.
Granted, but how much, I probably didn't phrase the question correctly, how much do you think people are genuinely interested beyond how it might affect them? And I don't imagine the situation really being any different in your country than it is here, and that is that whatever is happening and however, for example, a government decision or something affects their life on a day-to-day basis will always be first and foremost what's in their mind, over and above any other issues, such as international issues.
Well, what we're seeing here in the U.S., speaking as a media observer, is that the readership numbers for newspapers, the big papers in the major markets, are decreasing. The numbers for readership in the local papers are increasing. The numbers for people who are watching television news are decreasing. The numbers of the people who are getting their news from the internet is increasing. That having been said, what we're finding is that in poll numbers, people are generally not apathetic when they go to the polls as a result of what they have learned from their news sources, whatever it may be, but they just don't care. They have not done their research. I know that yesterday there were some callers talking about why President Bush was reelected. In his poll numbers, aside from the fact his first election against Al Gore, there was very questionable voter discrepancy and voter fraud in Florida. In his re-election, again, there was voter discrepancy and voter fraud allegations in Ohio and in Florida and various other states. So whether or not he was elected legally remains to be seen, but he's in and he's the president, and that's just the way it goes. And so hopefully we'll have some voter change at some point.
But you see, that also brings in another question, and does that, if you start to talk about voter fraud and what have you and all the rest. I mean, I remember in the first election seeing the argument about those chads which you punch out, and I was sent a picture of one of those, what they look like. And I remember thinking, if somebody couldn't work out how to use one of these things, then they shouldn't be let out alone, much less go in and vote for who's going to rule the country. But that aside, if those allegations are true, is it not a damning indictment on your country's electoral system?
Yes, it is. And that has been a major issue here in the United States for some time, because the presidents are not elected by popular vote. They're elected by the Electoral College, which means that a state has so many electoral votes, and if the state decides they are going to go towards one candidate to the other, that president gets the electoral votes, regardless of the fact that the popular vote was in favor of the other candidate.
What you're saying, though, is that your electoral college works on the basis, and for electoral college to turn that into Australian sense, you would almost refer to that as seats. But how it works is winner takes all. When you either ultimately win all of the votes, ultimately when you get to this electoral college, you either win all of the votes, as I understand it, or you win none of them. It's not as though, say for example, if you had a state that had 30 votes, that you might have one candidate who wins 18 votes in that state, and another who wins 12, you either ultimately end up winning 30 or none. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's what is almost constitutionally incorrect, because our system was supposedly set up with one person, one vote, and that's not the way it goes.
Isn't the Electoral College designed to give more voting power to the smaller states?
No.
Or by smaller meaning less populous states?
No, not at all. No,
okay.
No, because larger states, depending on how many representatives in Congress, senators that they have a larger electoral vote. That's why when you see the campaigns beginning, you see the candidates hitting the larger electoral states first and then going to the smaller states. You know, that's something that's been the bane of American elections for generations.
It just seems to me that if the system in that sense was to work more fairly, what you would do under that scenario is you would have a situation where one candidate might win most of the vote, but even if that candidate, say in a state where you had 30 votes, 30 Electoral College votes, even if they won 25, the other candidate would still pick up the 5. That seems to me to be a fairer way than perhaps the way it operates. However, once again I ask the question because I think that were that happening here we would be asking the same question. Has there been a huge hue and cry among the general population for a change to that system, even though arguably people like yourself have identified that it's a system that isn't perfect?
No, there hasn't been a huge human cry, maybe for the few weeks after the losing candidate concedes. For example, in this last election, when John Kerry may or may not have had more of a popular vote than George Bush in the re-election, there was a human outcry of people saying, why were the polls shut down earlier than they should have been? Why were we not allowed to go to the polls where we were assigned to go? Why were districts not to have polling centers that were originally allocated? But whoever wins, then it becomes a moot point, because the guy who wins is not going to worry about how the system works because it worked for him. So, no, it doesn't. So whoever is in charge is never going to change what did work for him.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Look, I have to leave it there, Richard.
All right, take care.